This thick of grass is undesirable for a lot of the wildlife species, and especially if we're thinking about deer and turkey and quail. If you can't walk through this very easily, how are they going to? Unless I'm managing for a grassland obligate songbird, which quail are not, they're shrubland obligates. Today, we're going to be talking about the role of native grasses in habitat management. Oftentimes when folks think about, especially managing open, early successional, or prairie plant communities, they think about native grasses and forbs, and certainly native grasses are an important component of a lot of these plant communities for some of the services they provide. Certainly grasses provide fuel to allow us to burn these sites. They also can provide some cover for species like deer, as well as, of course, nesting cover for species like bobwhite and turkeys. And also, if you're interested in cattle production, certainly grasses are an important component because they're the thing that's providing food for livestock. However, oftentimes, especially if you're managing with wildlife objectives, grass coverage can be too extensive because grass coverage can limit the number of forbs. The vast majority of wildlife species need no more than 30 to 40% grass coverage, and certainly if I'm managing for deer, turkey, or quail, if I have 60, 70, or 80% grass coverage, I'm actually thinking about tools that I can use to reduce the grass coverage rather than trying to promote it, because again, the grass is good in terms of the structure oftentimes until it becomes too dense and you get a dense litter layer, and also grass coverage can suppress forbs. I like native grasses. I like having some native grasses in an area that I'm managing for wildlife, but unless I'm managing for a grassland obligate songbird, which quail are not, they're shrubland obligates, I'm really not thinking about promoting grasses, and oftentimes I'm having to think about tools that I can use to maintain or even slightly reduce grass coverage. One way that we can evaluate the density of grass coverage, aside from just looking at it and saying, okay, in this spot we've got 100% grass coverage, certainly we have very limited forb coverage, we can also just simply walk through an area, and if you shuffle your feet a little bit and have trouble walking, that's telling you that there's a lot of litter on the ground and there's not very much bare ground spaces, and certainly if that's the case, you probably need to reduce grass coverage. You need to certainly reduce that litter layer, because if you think of your feet as either a quail or a turkey poult even, if you can't walk through this very easily, how are they going to? And so obviously walking through something like this, you can see that I'm getting bogged down in all this litter, and that's a real problem. If I can reach down on my boots and pick up a handful of litter after just taking a couple of steps, I need to do something to reduce not only this litter, which I could do that with just fire, but also this grass coverage, because that's what's giving me this litter. This thick of grass is undesirable for a lot of the wildlife species, and especially if we're thinking about deer and turkey and quail, we do not want this much grass coverage. Oftentimes we're using prescribed fire to manage these plant communities for wildlife, and certainly fire can be used to influence grass cover. Thinking about burning, especially during the latter portion of the growing season in September or October, is likely to have a little bit more negative effect on grasses compared to burning during the traditional time during either the dormant season or the early growing season from, say, January through May. And so if I can think about burning these at a little bit different time, that's a good tool. But again, if I've got really dense, extensive grass coverage like what I'm standing in right here, a lot of the time I'm actually thinking about other tools to reduce that grass coverage, including either grazing or herbicide applications or disking. Certainly if I've got cattle, grazing can be used to open this up a little bit, and especially when used in conjunction with fire, can be used to promote additional forb coverage. But if I'm not having cattle, because that either doesn't meet my objectives, or I'm managing small odd areas around a property with more of a wildlife focus, I'm really going to turn to either disking or herbicide applications. Disking is a great tool to reduce grass coverage, especially in areas that are relatively flat and you can easily access with a disc. But one thing I will say about disking, if you're going to do it, it needs to be an aggressive disking. So I'm not necessarily thinking about just barely turning the surface. You've got to usually disc it twice to really achieve reductions in grass cover. That's not going to eliminate grass, and that's not necessarily what I want, but that's going to reduce the coverage of grass to promote more forbs. And then finally, if you're in a place that you might want to turn towards herbicides, especially in a stand that you've previously planted dense stands of native grasses through either CRP plantings or just gone out and planted a dense stand of something like switchgrass or big blue stem, herbicides are another great tool in the toolbox to reduce that grass cover very effectively. We've got several good herbicides that do a good job of reducing grass coverage, but the take home is we're not necessarily thinking about eliminating grass, we're just thinking about shifting that plant community to allow a little bit less grass cover to promote more forb coverage, and that's going to be desirable for most wildlife species that we're managing for, including the vast majority of game species that we're working with. And so, you know, just thinking about when you're evaluating a plant community in an area that you're managing for wildlife, of course, I don't mind some grass, but I don't want it to be super dense. And if I do, I'm going to turn towards some of those techniques to reduce grass coverage.